next big area is epistemology. And so this is something I think a lot of you were thinking of when you were defining what you think philosophy is. And that is the study of knowledge and true belief, or really justified true belief, right? So, for example, when we're studying religious traditions or, again, different metaphysical systems from the East and the West, right, we're going to have to talk about entities of divine status, right? So if there is a god or gods in a particular tradition, the metaphysical question would be about whether or not they exist. The epistemological question would be whether or not we could know that they exist, or whether or not we could be rational in believing in their existence, right? And so again, these sorts of distinctions might seem subtle or not very meaningful, but they're incredibly distinct, right? There are gaps between what it takes to argue that a being exists and what it takes to argue that it's just rational to believe that something exists, right? So we can have different standards for those things and different types of arguments. And this leads to other really interesting questions. Again, we're going to be focusing more on Eastern philosophy, but because Eastern traditions do interact with religion, if some of you are interested in philosophy of religion, right, there are lots of interesting topics you could maybe explore in your papers, right? So for example, when we're talking about religious epistemology, we would distinguish between things like reason, faith, right? So believing something based on evidence versus a lack of evidence, right? So being reasonable, right? Being rational, having good reason for something, right? We typically think that you have to have some sort of evidence to support it. Faith is believing in something, but just lacking evidence in favor of it. Now, a lot of people think that philosophers are going to like poo-poo all over faith, right? That's not always the case. There are, in fact, many really incredible arguments that argue for the rationality of religious faith, right? Based on the idea that, perhaps we can't ever have evidence for God, right? It's still rational to believe, right? Is sort of the idea. But what a lot of people in the real world mistake faith for is something else. And this is something that I want to be very clear, no philosopher will ever defend. And that is dogma, which is belief in something despite contrary evidence. Okay, so you're going to see lots, right? Philosophy has nothing against faith, as long as you have a good argument for it, good reasons to believe based on faith. It doesn't have to be empirical evidence, but something else. Versus dogma, which is where you're believing something, but just ignoring all the evidence that goes against it, right? That would be epistemically irresponsible, according to philosophers. So lots of different ways to classify lots of different topics, right? We can approach it epistemologically, metaphysically, or the third one is axiology, which is the study of values. And in this case, we have, again, two sub-disciplines: aesthetics, which is the study of beauty, art, and other non-ethical judgments. I should say non-moral judgments.